Well, hello everybody. This is Dr. Novak again. Um, in this video, I'm going to talk about the growth of fish. Some things that a lot of newcomers don't realize about how to get their fish to grow, or sometimes they have a misconception that if I buy a bigger tank, my fish will grow according to the tank size. And that's all coming up next in this video. So stay tuned. Okay, in this video, I want to talk to you about the misconception that people get about aquariums and how their fish are going to grow. Something that's not talked about a lot, but it's something that you soon learn about very quickly. Some fish you may get may be stunted already. Their growth has been stunted because they could have been fed hormones or something like that, and then that was to get them bigger right away, real quick, and then when you buy them, the hormones stop and they seem not to grow very much or don't grow to their full potential, no matter how big of an aquarium the fish are in. Now, some people will say bigger is better, but there's a lot of stories of once you start getting into ponding, you find out that that's not necessarily the truth when it comes to fish. Now, koi grow very big, and goldfish can get pretty good size also. And I have lots of stories I could tell you where koi were in big ponds and didn't grow very well at all. One pond was a swimming pool, and it was converted over to a pond because the people didn't want to deal with the pool anymore. And I think it had a leak, so they hired somebody to come in and put a liner in it. And we're talking 25,000 gallon pond. And when we came to see the fish on how they did it, and the pond was running already for several years, and then people bought the house, and a lot of people looked at the pond as too much work. 25,000 gallon pond, and it had a little waterfall at the end with a filter, a little filter at the end with the waterfall. Anyhow, so the people that bought the house thought it would be novelty, it'd be great. They wanted to buy it. And they went out there, they fed the fish. I don't know how often, once a day or something like that, because they both worked. And because of that, when they came home, they would feed the fish. A lot of people are like that. A lot of times you can't feed the fish in the morning. Maybe you can only feed your pond fish in the evening when you come home from work. That's the way it is. That's the way life is. Some people will take the time out in the morning before they go to work and throw some food in the pond, but usually it becomes a once a day thing. Sometimes not even that, maybe every other day. And because of that they fed these fish, even in a 25,000 gallon pond, I wouldn't say the pond was overcrowded, but when they finally were taking down the pond and emptying it to get rid of all the rocks and boulders, I even have this in my book, a picture of the pond and everything, of people working in it. I think it had a depth of 10 foot, 9 or 10 feet deep. Like I said, it's a 25,000 gallon pond. And believe it or not, we pulled out the fish, and a lot of the fish look stunted. And if you ever see a koi that's stunted, you can tell by its body shape that, yeah, this thing's stunted. Even though it was living in a 25,000 gallon pond, you can tell a lot of the koi were stunted. They weren't being fed enough, and therefore there was only so much food in the pond that they could eat. And some people, they sold off a lot of the fish. They had vats. I even have it in my book. I showed the vats and everything. And people came and bought the fish if they wanted them. Now, none of these were what I would say show quality fish, because you would expect in 25,000 gallon pond that you would have fish that were, 24 to 32 inches, big, huge fish, but they weren't. None of them were. None of them were. I have to say, I think the biggest was maybe 12 to 16 inches, and that was it. That was about the max. So this goes to show you, even though you may have a big, huge body of water, that the fish did not grow in there. I've also seen that a lot of ponds, once you're into ponds and everything, they will tell you that people will make, let's say, a 2,700 gallon pond, 5,000 gallon pond, 7,000 gallon pond. One guy made a 12 or 13,000 gallon pond with using an anoxic filter. But a lot of hobbyists, koi hobbyists, will tell you that the biggest a koi will usually get in a backyard pond is about 19 inches. That's about it. This happens a lot. People will go out and spend great money on a koi and only have it grow to about 19 inches. And that is not to its potential. Okay. And even though they were avid hobbyists, one thing is they do crowd their ponds, but even crowding a pond, fish should grow some into your pond. Another thing is aquariums are the same way. You can take a fish and put them in a bigger aquarium, and you may wind up not having them grow to its potential, and you'll be wondering why. Now, I've seen this too. I've seen people have a 75-gallon aquarium and buy goldfish, and by the end of a year, they were about the size of a grapefruit. Okay, that's a pretty good body size within a year, and they were a lot smaller. Well, there's reasons for that, and one reason that any breeder knows is not only water quality, but food. And that's the constant that I found. When fish do not grow, even in 25,000 gallons of water, it all boiled down to one thing: the amount of food they were fed. And I've seen people with big ponds, 5,000 gallon ponds, 6,000, 7,000 gallon ponds. The fish didn't grow. They can't get them to 24, 28, 30 inches. They can't get them that size. And there's a reason why, because people go to work and they can't feed their fish except once a day. And they do feed them generously during that feeding, but it's just not enough. And this happens the same thing with your aquarium. And I'm going to give you an example exactly. In my 40-gallon breeder, which is actually about a 50-gallon tank, I got two of my Ryonkins back. Remember, I sold them. It was a calico Ryankin and an orange Ryankin. And I had them for quite a while, over a year or two. And I sold them off to a lady here where I live. And they took the fish, and they bought two other fish, Watkins. Now, Watkin is a Japanese common goldfish. Like we have our comets, they have Watkins. The only difference is they're like a comet, but they have a double tail instead of a single tail. And it's usually a shorter tail, but that is their common goldfish over in Japan. It's called the Watkin. So she had two Watkins. I remember she gave the fish back to me, and she owned them for over a year, year and a half when I sold them to her. But she gave them back, didn't want any money for them, and I got two of the Watkins. So I said, okay, fine, I'll take them back, give them a home, because she couldn't take care of them anymore. So, all right. So the first thing I started doing is I got my automatic feeder, my Eheim, and I set it up to feed 4 times a day. That's as much as you can feed 4 times a day. It won't go any more than that. And what I was feeding my fish, I would scoop it out, measure it, feed them. Well, I noticed in every feeding with that automatic feeder, not only did they receive as much as I was giving them twice a day, because I fed them once in the morning, once in the evening. Now they get fed at 8 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 8 o'clock at night. The lights go out at 10. 8:30, and then the lights go out at 10. So they get fed 4 times a day. And one thing I've noticed, and I also bought some Belazini, Geophagus belazini. If you don't know what they are, they're very nice geophagus fish. And if you ever seen one full grown, you'd fall in love with it. It's very nice, neat fish. And they grow a hump on their head. Not like that of a flower heart. No, no, no. They don't look like that. They just have this weird looking head. And I like them. And they get pretty colorful. And they're a great fish if you can get a hold of some. So I got a hold of some here in Florida, and I bought them and I put them in the tank, and I'm trying to get them to grow. So since I've owned them, I've noticed that they've gained weight and they are growing, which is good. Now I'm feeding them 4 times a day though. So compared to what I was feeding when I fed them at 8 o'clock and then in the evening sometime whenever I got around to it, I noticed that all the fish in the aquarium have gained weight. You can see the Watkins now have more girth on them, more weight to them, more body. They've already grown in size. I can see that they've grown in size. I can see like on one of the Watkins, a lot of Watkins will come in red and white, almost like a Saras Comet, which is red and white. So they have that real deep, dark red, which is highly desirable for goldfish, like Saras Comets, or if you have Watkins, that red and white color, very highly desirable Watkin or Saras Comets, which if you have a goldfish tank and you want some hardy goldfish, having a tank full of Watkins or Saras Comets is really beautiful tank. And I noticed the red on his head is all filled in. Before there was some white when I got the fish. Now it's all red, solid red. Now he may wind up as he gets older getting more red on the body. And that's that real red, vibrant red. You know, that real strong red. It really looks good against the white. And of course you have to have that white sheen, almost like a gin ring sheen to the fish, and it really sticks out. Really is an enjoyable goldfish to have, but it's an easy goldfish to have. Now, I'm feeding them 100% more food than what they were receiving 4 times a day. So they're receiving 100% more food. Means I'm going through a lot more food. Not only the amount of food feeding your fish, but the quality of food of which you feed your fish. A lot of people will feed their fish flake. Now, a long time ago, and I'm talking 60s, flake food used to come with hormones. And the reason they did that was to get your fish to grow. And when we were younger back in the 60s and you had an aquarium, even if it was a little 10-gallon aquarium, it was not unusual, even with a 10-gallon aquarium, to have your fish grow big because they had hormones in the food to help the fish grow. They stopped doing that. A lot of companies don't put hormones in their food anymore. You know, like it's a good thing if you don't add hormones to the food. But now a lot of fish are having trouble growing. Big complaint I get. Why aren't my fish growing? Like, you know, they should be. Well, what am I doing wrong? Well, as we know today, what do hobbyists do? They make up these tanks. They don't want any algae, so they don't feed. If you don't feed, you're not going to grow fish. Just like in the 25,000 gallon. One of the people who bought one of the fish out of that 25,000 gallon pond took it to their 2,700 gallon pond. That's a far cry. And I show pictures of their pond, how it was overcrowded. But those people fed their fish a lot, several times a day, in the morning, in the evening, late evening. You know, they fed their fish. They didn't skimp on the food. And they use Purina food. That was a food I recommended they use for their game fish chows, what it was called. And they use, it's cheap and expensive, but they fed it. And that same koi, it was I don't know what it was because it was kind of distorted when I saw it. A Seiki. It could have been that, black and white. But anyhow, that fish grew. This contorted fish grew to be a decent fish. It grew good size, maybe 12 to 15 inches, where in the other pond it wasn't. It was compact, and I thought, what did you buy that for? That thing should be called out and destroyed. But they loved it. They liked the color, and they felt sorry for it. So anyhow, came up to be a decent fish. In their pond, it grew, but they fed it. So even though the pond was smaller, and even though the pond, I would say, was overcrowded, the fish grew, and it grew out of that stunted stage to be a decent looking small koi. Like I said, it looked like it's 12 to 15 inches, which I was quite surprised to see, being that it was in 25,000 gallons. But I've seen this with other ponds, 2,700 gallon ponds. You look at their koi. Oh, how long have you had these? Oh, I've had them 4 years. And the things are like this. Their goldfish and koi are like this. What do you mean you had them 4 years? Yeah, I've had them 4 years. But I don't feed them that much. Maybe I feed them every day, maybe every 2 or 3 days. I let them eat what's in the pond. Well, by doing that, they were literally starving their fish, and they're not going to grow. And that happens, and you'll see that a lot with ponds, that people don't have their fish grow. For example, another one is, there was a guy named Zach. He had a 12 or 13,000 gallon pond, and he had an anoxic filter. I showed in my book in the back, waterfall coming in, 2 skimmers at the side, and he would buy fish 6 inches, 7 inches, and he'd grow them in his pond. Within about 2-3 years, these fish were 24 to 28 inches in his 12,000 gallon pond. And he would sell them off to other hobbyists, because Zach, he was retired, he didn't mind feeding his fish. So he'd feed them in the morning, feed them in the evening, he's constantly throwing food in there. And because he had the anoxic filter, he felt comfortable of feeding his fish or overfeeding his fish, and his water did not turn green or anything. And this was a big pond. It was a deep pond. In fact, he had a rope on the side of the pond because he had fallen in once, so he could grab onto the rope to get himself out of the pond, because ponds get real slippery on the sides. And he had that. But he had always had a clear pond, even though he fed his fish heavily. And people would buy his koi from him as he grew them up, and he would get real nice show koi at 6 inches, and he'd get them big, and people, oh, I'll take it, I'll buy it. Yeah, well, what do you want to sell it for? So he made money doing that. But he fed them. But he had an anoxic filter. A lot of people didn't want to feed their fish because they were using filters like a Nexus, for example, is a very expensive pond filter. And it does about 3,500 gallon pond, or no, a 3,500 gallon an hour pump is all the faster you can pump through it. Okay, a Nexus filter. They're limited on how fast you can move water through the filter. Where the anoxic filter, Zach, he moved 20,000 gallons an hour through that filter. No problem. No problem whatsoever. He had 2 big, 1 or 2 horsepower pumps on either side, pumping through his wares going to the anoxic filter. And of course, the anoxic filter doesn't care how fast you're moving water through it. So his fish got big, and he wasn't worried about over polluting his pond, because he also used an ultraviolet light. But everybody uses an ultraviolet light when you have a pond and expensive fish. The point I'm making is he fed them. And so the size of an aquarium is not going to dictate entirely how fast your fish are going to grow or how big they're going to grow. It's food. Like I said, I've already noticed the fish that I was given back growing. I can tell you that orange Ryunkin It's already grown. They're both fatter, the calico and the orange Ryunkin. They're both, you can tell, are getting more girth, they're getting fatter, and I can tell the orange Ryunkin has grown in the short time I have owned it.